Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's On Aging conversation. My name is Barbara McMillan, Provincial Community Engagement Coordinator for United Way of British Columbia's Healthy Aging team, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional ancestral territories of all First Nations in this land we now call Canada, on which we gratefully work and gather. The On Aging Conversation series is a collaboration between Healthy Aging Core and Help Age Canada. If you missed earlier episodes, you'll find them on Apple Podcasts and on Healthy Aging Core Canada, the national knowledge hub connecting agencies that support and advance independent living for older Canadians. You'll also find other information and resources related to the subjects we're talking about, as well delivered to your inbox if you've signed up for the twice-monthly Core e-news, and we will put the link to do that in the chat box. In our work with CORE, HelpAge, and the extraordinary network of community-based senior serving agencies, volunteers, and professionals, we're really privileged to encounter many thought leaders and innovators in the field of healthy aging. And so On Aging Conversations was launched to help bring some of these ideas, innovations, and perspectives to a wider audience. Each episode includes a short video that highlights the community-based organization that's making a difference in the lives of older Canadians, followed by Help Age Canada CEO Gregor Snedden in conversation with our featured guest, and a little time for a few questions before we wrap up. And that's it, 30 minutes of healthy aging information and inspiration every 2 weeks. Meanwhile, please feel free to introduce yourself and post your questions in the chat box. And now I'll turn it over to Gregor Snedden, CEO of Help Age Canada, your host for On Aging.
Thanks, Barb, and welcome everyone. Great to be with you again this week, and a special welcome to Corey Mackenzie, who will be speaking to momentarily. For those of you who aren't familiar, Help Age Canada, we support community-based initiatives through partnerships across Canada and abroad to improve the lives of older persons and their communities. And we look to serve as the convener of the community-based seniors services sector in Canada. So as part of our program, we like to begin with a short video featuring some of the work of some of our amazing partners across the country. And today, we're coming to the end of November, but we're in Movember, a great time to recognize and look towards men's mental health. And so we wanted to do a video this morning that Help Age Canada has the real privilege of being able to support this amazing new program in Canada that Corey also is very familiar with as well, and that is the Men's Sheds movement, which we'll touch on a little bit later, but we're going to share right now a little video about Men's Sheds, and this is from the Men's Sheds group in Ottawa, Ontario. So let's see here if we can make it happen.
I'm Kevin Ford, and I'm 68. Well, I can speak for my need. I wanted to share my experiences with other like-minded individuals, and to learn new skills from others and be able to teach them. For the first Men's Shed in Ottawa, I get to learn about the lives of 30 interesting men who had 6, 7, 8 decades of life experience, either doing or witnessing some of the most interesting things that have happened around the world. And these are guys who have now retired and who would never known that they did those things. It gives them something to look forward to. There's always an incredibly engaging conversation. We have a Pulitzer Prize winner. We have 2 CDC reporters. We have a guy who taught in China, Beijing, for 2 decades. We have a guy who has his personal name on patents for satellites. I can go on in terms of the quality and the depth of the people that are here. And each of them brings a different piece to the party. It's a real privilege to know them. So I see a single workshop with 3 different groups of dementia using the same facility. And in the evening, people who aren't retired using it too. And finally, collecting all that expertise and passing it on to the next generation. That's my vision of dementia. And if the grants can help us along the way, that's where I want to be.
All right. Well, it was a great little video, a little snapshot of a men's sheds right here in Ottawa, where I am. It's such an exciting program. And again, we'll touch a little bit on the men's sheds program a little later on. But before further ado, I'd really like to welcome Corey Mackenzie. Dr. Corey Mackenzie is a clinical psychologist, professor and director of clinical training in the Department of Psychology, adjunct professor in psychiatry, and research affiliate with the Center on Aging at the University of Manitoba. And research in his Aging and Mental Health Lab aims to understand how age affects mental health, enhance older adults' access to mental health services, and individuals to cope with stress when caring for older adults with dementia. So really thrilled to have you with us here today, Corey, in this month of Movember. And how are things there in the PEG?
Things are good here. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you this morning.
Oh, it's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit, what was your journey? How did you arrive to where you are now there in Manitoba? Because I don't think you're actually from there originally, are you?
No, I'm from a small town in central Alberta, just south of Red Deer, sort of in between Calgary and Edmonton. I'll try to give you the short version of how I got here and how I got interested in aging. And the story really kind of had its roots with my grandparents growing up in that small town in central Alberta. I had my grandmother on my dad's side and my grandma and grandpa on my mom's side, and they were second parents to me in many ways. And I spent lots and lots of time with them growing up, and they would take me around to their, to bowling and to, events with their older friends. And I always had a comfort and love for spending time with older adults. And then when I got to university and got into an honors degree program, and they said, go find someone to work with that would supervise your honors degree, I found Alan Dobbs at the University of Alberta, who does work with aging drivers. And from there, I went to Queen's University and got involved with Jane Knox and Bill Jakoski in their aging lab. That work was really kind of focused on older adults' mental health. And that's been work that I've continued to do. When I graduated from grad school and got my first job at University of Toronto, and then ended up here at University of Manitoba.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's the Queen's Notes.
Wow, very cool, very cool. Well, tell us about your work there. Aging and mental health. Your aging and mental health lab. What do you do all day?
That's a good question. It's there's a lot of balls that get juggled in terms of supervising students and keeping various research projects on the go. One of the central kind of areas of focus in my lab is on this sort of idea that when people struggle with mental health problems and it gets to the point where they need to seek help, there are certain groups that are less likely to seek help than others, and the age demographic that's the least likely to seek help when they're struggling with mental health problems are older adults. So we've spent a lot of time in my lab looking at kind of barriers to mental health service use among older adults who are struggling with substance use and anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. So that's one thing that we do. Another sort of passion of mine is looking at changes in mental health as people get older, not just from a pathology perspective, but from this perspective that it's actually the case that in general, mental health tends to increase at least from middle age into late life. So there's this kind of misperception that aging is a kind of a depressing, hard, emotionally challenging time. And the data actually suggests otherwise. It's that, older adults are mentally healthier than your average middle-aged adult. So that's another area of focus. And then you also mentioned some intervention work that we do around helping people care for caregivers who are providing support to older adults, whether that be nurses or family caregivers. So those are sort of the three things that keep us busy.
Oh, wow, that's a busy day.
Yeah, it is.
Well, as we mentioned at the beginning, it's Movember here, and so let's talk about men's health, aging men's mental health. But maybe actually before we do that, maybe let's just take a step back and maybe you could share a little bit some of the differences between. It never really occurred to me, the differences in men and women's aging mental health journey. Like, how do you distinguish? What are some of the markers, indicators, or what's different about them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so it is, so it's true that in general, as people age, again, at least from middle age into later life, mental health tends to improve. And it's also true that for a subset of folks, they're going to run into trouble. They're going to run into challenges with anxiety, depression, substance use, other mental health problems. And it is true that there are some gender differences in terms of what that looks like, especially around the mental health challenges. And we don't know exactly reasons for this, but there's some fairly good reasons to speculate about gender differences and reasons why men and women tend to kind of cope with them differently. So one of the findings is that regardless of age, it's the case that women tend to have about twice the rates of depression and anxiety compared to men. And men tend to have roughly twice the rates of substance use disorders, alcohol use, and other drug disorders. And what that likely speaks to is the way in which we tend to cope with emotional challenges when they show up. That in our culture, it's acceptable or okay for women to be sad and anxious and to talk about that with their friends and family members. It's not as okay for men culturally in general. So men often, use some of these avoidant coping strategies that are going to lead them into trouble with kind of substances. And so it's the same underlying challenge, right? Women, and I'm talking about generalities here, but women will get anxious or depressed and men will get drunk or high. Yeah.
Interesting. So that's kind of the, sort of, well, what would you say would be maybe some healthy strategies, or what would be that men and women may address their mental health issues?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a complicated question and there's a complicated answer to it, but I'll see if I can sort of boil it down to something that kind of makes sense. So one of the sort of leading theories in psychological science in terms of what well-being consists of is this idea of psychological flexibility. And really what that refers to is opening up to difficult internal experiences when they show up. So trying to, notice our thoughts that show up that are telling us that we're a failure, we're no good, trying to open up to challenging emotional experiences rather than kind of sticking our heads in the sand and avoiding them. So there's this open, accepting approach to difficult internal experiences as one component. Then there's this second component of being present. And, everyone's familiar these days with the idea of mindfulness. It's this, this catchphrase, but really what it means is to be in the present moment and to bring a particular kind of attitude to that present moment awareness, curiosity, kindness, compassion, openness, as opposed to, getting stuck ruminating about past challenging events or worrying about the unpredictable catastrophic future, these things that we kind of get pulled into. So that's the second piece. So open, aware, and then the third piece has to do with living a life that aligns with value and purpose and meaning. So it's, having a values-focused life. And we all, I think, can appreciate that when people get into struggles with anxiety and depression, often the value becomes not feeling so terrible anymore, and then pushes people into avoidance. And what we really want people doing is to kind of touch on their values, like what is important to me, what's the reason that I want to get out of bed in the morning, and then use these openness and present moment skills to allow us to do that. So I'm not sure if that was helpful or complicated.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's a really great takeaway, because I mean, just on, I think all of us struggle, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think all of us in some way have had to, some obviously struggling more than others, but we've all had to work with our experience of the pandemic, and whether we call that, well, addressing our own mental health, I think is healthy for everyone. And those are three great things: that being open, being aware, and then a life that's centered on, exploring our values, purpose, and meaning to navigate through that difficulty. That's really rich. Makes me, also really reflect on, we often talk about isolation and loneliness of both men and women, but I wonder in particular about men. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think sometimes men who aren't maybe quite accustomed to sharing, as you point out, with their friends, they can tend to just hold inwards perhaps, and isolate even more and more perhaps than women might. Would that be the case?
Yeah, for sure, Gregor. There's real challenges in that. I mean, and some of that has to do with the fact that for many men, again, these are generalities, but for many men, they have social connections tied to their places of employment and work.
Right.
And that's true for women, but as well. But when men retire, those tend to drop off more so, So that's a factor. This sort of cultural thing around women being more social and more focused on sort of tending and befriending, this kind of like social connection piece that women tend to do better at than men, is part of it. And then it's also the case, and we hear this anecdotally a lot, and I think there's truth to it, that among coupled partners in relationship where there's a husband and a wife, it tends to be the wife that manages the social stuff. Yeah. And then if there's a loss, if the husband passes, the wife maintains her social network, but if the wife passes, then the husband's social network can fall apart and fall away. So there's a number of reasons why isolation and loneliness, I think, is a challenge for all of us, especially within the last 3 years, but particularly for men.
I also understood that we had some conversations recently with aging new Canadians, and this idea that oftentimes in some communities, a man finds his value, purpose, role in kind of an outward facing way, bringing income for the family and so on, whereas the woman's role is often to take care of the family, kind of inward focused on the family. So for a new Canadian who the frustration leaving that outward work behind, not really being able to establish those connections, find fulfilling work or meaningful engagement outwardly, but the woman in some cases still finds her fulfillment and enrichment by taking care of her family, her husband, and so on. Yeah. And the man is often left, and now without even a social circle and so on to engage with as a new Canadian in Canada.
Yeah, well said. And the role of culture inside this question is so interesting, because there are cultural influences on the expectations that we face in terms of how we're supposed to act and behave and what's of value to us. And that becomes more important as Canada becomes more diverse and opens up to that. I agree. So as you were talking, the other thing I was going to mention in terms of a reason why loneliness and isolation can be more of a challenge for men, and this kind of circles back to the video we watched at the start of the podcast, is many of the community sort of agencies or community supports that are available are either mixed gender or targeted at women, and the mixed gender ones tend to be majority female attendees. So there are fewer ways for older men to connect into kind of social programs that can
Mhm.
offer them some of what Men's Sheds does. It's coming in and filling a niche.
Well, maybe we can, in a minute, we can talk a little bit about Men's Sheds, but just before we do that, what are some strategies or some ways you think that we can encourage men to address their mental health issue? And second to that, what kind of programs or opportunities are in fact out there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that part of what we're sort of doing, part of what I advocate we do, which is to let's put these issues on the table. Let's have men in particular thinking about their mental health and thinking about the ways that they cope with mental health challenges. So if you are the kind of person who tends to, and many of us are, by the way, we tend to cope with emotional challenges in this avoidant, sticking your head in the sand, distracting yourself, drinking, whatever that is, then part of what's required is to see how that works for you. Yeah. And for most of us, that tends to have this kind of like short-term better, long-term worse flavor. That's how avoidant coping tends to work. So part of it is just, taking a look at how am I feeling and how am I coping with this? And just knowing that there are resources out there that can help people to pivot into coping with challenges in a more productive, healthy way.
So like what kind of programs or opportunities are out there? Where do we direct folks to go?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on how like the degree of the challenge that people are experiencing, right? So if there's real challenge, like severe depression, severe debilitating anxiety, then those folks hopefully will find their way to a mental health professional. And if you're older, sometimes those are managed through primary care, but primary care physicians will also sometimes refer to geriatric mental health professionals, geropsychologists and geriatric psychiatrists and geriatric social workers. So there's that sort of like that professional route to care for people who are really struggling. On the other hand, if someone's, coping okay, doing okay, but they're struggling, then, typically what we're looking at there are community resources and, looking to agencies like the Canadian Mental Health Association. Regardless of where you live in Canada, you can go into the CMHA website and find local resources and sort of Canada-wide federal resources for helping cope with mental health issues. And then your organization, helps, and others like it help kind of facilitate this kind of social piece too, right? Because what happens so often inside of challenge is that people tend to shut down socially. If they're anxious, if they're depressed, they isolate, they turn inward. So it's really important in those situations is to keep people connected socially, and the work that you guys are doing and other organizations is really critical inside that space.
And maybe, do you have any comments about substance abuse and use? Because I know I know, for example, there's some apps out now, for example, that many people are finding successful. That I think there's one called Sunnyside, for example, where it helps you, monitor your drinking, say, and curb it down. Maybe you move to a couple of days a week or whatever it is.
Right.
There's some really neat apps out there that I've seen that have been getting a lot of traction. I don't know if you have any comments about that for those who maybe are being aware that, boy, you know what, I think I may be overdoing it a little too often.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll say is that the sort of epidemiological evidence on substance use suggests that it really drops off in later life. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's hard to maintain a lifestyle of abuse for a long time. So sometimes it can kind of sort of burn out, or unfortunately people can, die as a result of, long-term substance use. So we tend to see less of it in later life. What we do see is a lot of abuse of prescription medications among older adults that kind of flies under the radar a little bit, but is another significant issue. So yes, I mean, part of that, Gregor, at least in my opinion, once again, is just, if it is running people into trouble to the point where it's interfering with their lives, then accessing help, and if that's sort of self-help app sort of options, then that's great, and that's often not enough for people. And if it's not enough, then linking people into professional sources of help is the better way to go.
Super. Well, I do want to hand it, we're almost out of time here, and I know Barb has a question, and we never really did have a chance to say too much about Men's Sheds, but Men's Sheds is another great program where men can participate in their community and engage in meaningful work shoulder to shoulder. I love the phrase that women connect face to face, men connect shoulder to shoulder. A great opportunity, and in fact, Help Age Canada has granting opportunities for Men's Sheds to start a Men's Sheds or for project grants in their own communities. Do you just have maybe a quick word on the Men's Sheds program, or what you can, any comments on that?
Our research group with colleagues at UBC, where we were involved about a decade ago in putting together a kind of a toolkit to help guys start up new sheds if they're wanting to do that, and that's still available on the website, or it will be shortly. Now these are really important organizations that are male focused, and they're filling I think a unique niche, like I said before, in terms of if older men are looking for a space where they can connect with other older men, then this is a really nice fit. And there's a good and growing body of research showing that it has health benefits, physical health benefits, mental health benefits, social benefits, obviously. Yeah, these are doing good work.
Awesome. Well, Barb, over to you.
Yeah, I've got a question. I've been thinking a lot lately about resilience and how some people bounce back from really serious life events, negative life events. And is there a difference between men and women in levels of resilience? Do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is that there isn't a big difference there. And in my own personal kind of view on resilience, especially in later life, is that a lot of it has to do with people's histories of trauma. That if people have a history of kind of big T trauma, really challenging experiences in their childhoods with abuse and neglect, that it is really hard for those people later in life to be resilient in the face of stress. There's just a lot of kind of learning and challenge in their histories that make it hard. That what we tend to see more of inside of resilience is this, people who have a more stable kind of psychological profile and a history that allows them to weather the stresses and challenges that other people have a hard time with.
Thanks.
Well, I think we are out of time. Once again, we always just seem to be scratching the surface, but it's always such a thrill to have this chance to connect. Thanks so much for being with us today, Corey. It was just great to be with you. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. This has been fun.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Corey. Thanks, Gregor. And thanks, Gemma, our Zoom whiz. And we've posted the link to CORE, where you can find more resources on Men's Sheds, as well as all kinds of other interesting things and previous on aging conversations. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
I'll be back online again on December 8th, speaking to Sophia Mohammed from Help Age Ethiopia. You can imagine a country with no social security programs and an average lifespan of 64 years old as they struggle to just bring a basic structure of dignity for older people. And really, it's so similar in many ways to our Western context of, it's about creating choice, freedom, dignity as we age. I'm really looking forward to that conversation as well. So we'll see you on the 8th. And again, thanks again, Corey. I'm really taking some great takeaways here today. Open, aware, and values driven. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.